Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reimagine Together, where every week I go live with a wide array of speakers to have more profound conversations about what a thriving humanity future really means and the little steps that we can take today to bring about a better tomorrow. My name is Carley Marcelle, and I'm a speaker and a coach on how to become a thriving humanity brand leader and why it matters in the age of disruption. I'm also the founder of the Machu Team Experience Network, which unites and empowers thriving humanity leaders to consciously create tomorrow together. If you are interested in this sort of content and these dialogues, then I encourage you to definitely subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps things to circulate. And you can also find out more about what it means to be a thriving humanity brand leader and the Machu Team Network by signing up for the email list, which is in the links below this video. Today's episode, I bring you some courageous artists to talk about the power, who have used the power of story to heal. And we're going to discuss how we can progress humanity by not putting things, in the dark and repressing and sweeping under the rug, but actually bringing the dark into the light. And today I have Sydney Bauer and R.C. Riley and hopefully Arlene Malinowski, who may be joining us. We're having a little bit of a technical issue, so she might be coming on at the end. And each of them are going to share their stories, their healing journeys, and the impact of their work. And at the end, we'll reimagine what the world would look like if we really supported artistic expression in this way, and how you can tap into your own inner artist to heal and overcome even the most painful events. So please note that we will be talking about some more challenging topics and abuse throughout this episode. Just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And let's go ahead and get started with RC.
Hi.
Hi.
Everyone.
How are you doing? Good morning.
I am doing well.
Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I would love if you could just give everyone a little intro to who you are, what you do right now, what you care about.
Sure. So my name is R.C. Riley. I am a writer. I'm an activist, a storyteller, and a performer. And that's a lot of words, but basically what I do is I try to use my God-given talents of writing, public speaking, and the ability to reach out to large crowds and cultivate community. And so sometimes that community is in a theater space or a coffee house or in my backyard. And the goal of creating that community is to really empower our fellow humans out here, right, to engage with one another and to move towards action. So I think that that's just a beautiful way to be able to do so. I've written several solo shows. My very first one was called Wrong Way Journey, and it delineates my journey of healing after a sexual assault. And because as a Black woman in this world, I've also experienced racism. I'm a queer woman. And so all of those isms combined, the story really looks at the intersection of race, sexuality, gender, as well as faith. So there's a lot going on in the solo show, but it's been my opportunity to help others heal by creating this community. I mean, just being in the physical space of the theater and them experiencing me telling this story has helped people to move forward. So I'm very pleased with that.
Yes. And I would love for you to share as well, just before we dive into your story and everything, what you are doing a media show, what projects you have going on right now.
So I have several other projects. So one of them is a Facebook Live show. It's Mondays, called Monday Musings with RC. Like yourself, I have a variety of topics. They're really centered around issues of concern for minority communities. And I bring on guests that talk about things from voting to domestic violence awareness, entrepreneurship. And we talk about it in ways of letting the community know that you can be a part of moving towards a better future for everyone. You can take your little step, which really isn't so little. We don't need to say little. But just to let people know that it doesn't have to be such a huge, arduous task, that there are small steps that everyone can take, that will, all of us together taking those steps will make a large impact. And so hopefully by bringing on those guests to talk about issues that matter to our communities, especially minority communities, people will feel empowered to do the work. And then I see myself as leading by example of doing the work, being very involved in the community, not just with marches, but also marches and rallies, writing to elected officials when I disagree with things, staying abreast of what's going on in the community, and then sharing that information. So that show, Monday Musings with RC, is on my Facebook page at RC Riley, as well as my Facebook page at Wrong Way Journey.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm sorry, what did you say?
A little bit about what I'm doing.
Yes, yes. So many things. So many things. The beauty, again, of artists and activists. Lots of work to do.
Definitely.
Well, I'm going to bring you back on. I would like to dive a little bit more into your story and how you've used it. But before we do that, I actually want to introduce Sydney, and then we'll all get on together and start to talk about those stories.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. Hi, Sydney.
Hello. Good morning or afternoon, wherever everybody
I know,
is.
all over in the world, possibly. Thank you so much for being here today. Sydney is also a newer impact producer here at Machutine and has been helping out with our programming. And so if you could just give everybody a little intro to you, the what matters to you, and what projects you're doing right now.
Awesome. Would love to. Hello, everyone. I'm Sydney, as Carly mentioned, and a lot of what I do, I like to refer to as being in the impact space. So I do work full-time in the nonprofit world for an organization called the Network of Executive Women. But I am definitely kind of the type of person who is an activist, is also an artist. So there's a lot that I like to do outside of work too. And I do freelance as a documentary filmmaker and also a podcast producer. And the work that I do specifically in documentary film is around impact, or as Carly said, an impact producer. And a lot of people will kind of give me a quizzical look, like I have no idea what that means. And the way that I usually like to describe it is it's kind of like marketing, but not for a profit, and instead for an impact. So my main driver is what audiences are we reaching with the content that we're producing, and what conversations are we starting? And, you know, how can we expand audiences to make sure that we're having the largest impact? And my focus, especially with any art that I create or any media that I create, is that I am maximizing impact. There's always a social justice or kind of a social impact aspect to anything that I create. So I work on films about reproductive health care, community organizing as well, and am also currently a leader on the Women for Biden Illinois team for the upcoming election. So also have dabbled in community organizing. So all with that mission-driven focus, and am about to launch a very large passion project of mine, which is a podcast called Love Is Not, that will actually be launching next week. And explores, yes, I know, crazy, it's real. And that will be exploring both my experience and then the general experience of relationship abuse.
Fantastic. And we will dive all into that as well. And now what I would love from the both of you, if you're open to sharing, and RC, we can start with you, is to just get a little bit more. Do you mind sharing a little bit of your story and the journey to telling your story?
Sure. So as I said, I'm a survivor of a sexual assault. I my sophomore year in college, a friend of mine came to visit, basically, long story short, assaulted me. And it was, I kind of grew up in a household that kept me extremely naive. So I did not even think that that was possible. I know that sounds silly, but I just didn't think that was possible. And so I didn't really register what was happening before it happened. Um, and so for me, afterwards, I really couldn't understand the world. It didn't make sense to me. Something happened that I didn't think was possible. And then I had all these questions about, well, what else is possible? What else can people do to another person? And I felt like it was because I was a woman,
Mm.
because I had a vagina, this happened to me. And that really angered me. And at the time, I didn't have the language of queer, but I knew that I never identified as straight. And so that was the other piece of it. And I was like, well, he didn't even know that about me. So what is that saying? I felt like that was something that maybe he read in me and felt like this shouldn't be right. So now I'm trying to fix it in some way. So there were all these crazy questions, and I did a lot of soul searching. I grew up in a very strict Christian household, the only girl. So there were certain expectations placed on me that were not placed on my brothers. But I met all those expectations and never thought that another way of living was correct. So I ended up using the Women's Center as my refuge. I mean, the Women's Center
Mm.
just, they were such a blessing. I will say before the assault, I didn't even know it existed on campus. And I encourage anybody who needs help to find a women's center, a counseling center anywhere, because I mean, they have the tools that you need in that moment of despair. Um, but overall, I think the trauma led me to come to grips with my sexuality and
Mm.
be very honest about what I wanted versus living a way that my parents set up for me. So, for instance, issues like abortion rights. Again, I grew up in a strict Christian household. So, like, it was taught at school and everywhere else that abortion was wrong, it's evil. But personally, I felt like, well, people should be able to make that choice, not anyone else making that choice for them. And so it was a big deal for me to come to that realization that my voice mattered.
Mm.
And so my healing was centered around finding my voice and accepting my voice, as opposed to saying, no, what you think isn't right. And there's no space in this world for your way of thinking. And so I really had to do a lot of work on speaking my truth and being okay with it being different than somebody else's. And so, because that happened in college, by the time I started writing the story, I actually, one of the therapists at the Women's Center suggested that I journal, just journal about everyday things.
Yes.
And so I started journaling, and I journaled all the time, just every little thing. And eventually I had so many stories, so much information in there that when I got a little bit older, people would say, you're always writing. You need to make whatever you're writing into a movie or something. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And so I started drafting this play, and it turned out to be this solo show that was about this healing journey. Whereas I thought that that was just going to be like one little scene. I didn't even think it would be a whole show centered around that event.
So powerful.
Um, yeah, and so it continued from there. I was able to take classes with Arlene and perfect that writing and that storytelling and continue. So I started storytelling in 2016, and the storytelling is in the short form, was really helpful in getting more confident in telling my full story. So yeah.
So that journey to writing your story, and especially, I mean, I hear so much about the moment that these events happen, right? Your entire world is turned upside down.
Hmm.
You can't see,
Right.
nothing makes sense anymore.
Exactly.
And then through that artistic expression, it sounds like that finding that ownership of the voice and creating a space to where you allow yourself to explore it.
Right. For sure.
How do you feel once you really started to put your story out there? How did you feel?
I felt a number of things. Of course, I felt afraid because I thought people would judge me. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because when we've survived a situation and we're the quote victim, which I hate, I say that I'm a warrior woman because I went from being a victim to a survivor
Yes.
to being a warrior.
Yes.
And that has been the full journey for me. It's different. Like, it's a different mentality when you get to the warrior state. Now, as a warrior, I'm fighting not just to survive, but I'm fighting on behalf of other people. So I have to be upfront as a warrior because there are people behind me that are depending on me to do the work. And I would say that, so initially I was fearful of being judged for being a victim. Like, I should have seen that coming. I should have known better, that sort of thing. And then later, I was very angry,
Mm-hmm.
but I was more angry with myself because I let it happen. And so then I had to learn to forgive myself because it wasn't my fault at all. And then I got to the place of saying, no, there's power in this space that I'm in now. And then I kept like just looking in the space I was in and really being accepting of myself. And that's where I continue to grow in that power. And then it's like, oh, well, if I can do this, there are plenty of other people I know who aren't yet in the space that I'm in, but maybe I can show them by example and they could get there too. And that's where the push to tell the story to a larger crowd came. It's like, no, I'm a warrior now. So other people need to see that they can get there too.
Absolutely. Such a powerful journey when we talk about just that we all go through. It's that empowerment journey, the victim of the story, owning it, dealing with it, and then moving into leadership and helping others to come out as well.
Right.
So beautiful. And we'll keep going a little bit, but Sydney, I would love for you to also share at this point what story it is that you brought into the world and your journey to getting there.
Yeah, definitely. And RC, I so appreciate hearing your journey as well. I feel like, if I can say so, such a kindred spirit in terms of what my journey was as well, and telling my story. Similarly, it started in college, and it was through a very abusive relationship that I had been in for 3.5 years until I was able to leave. And actually, that anniversary, I'm like super like spiritual in that sense, but I celebrate the day that I left as an anniversary, and it is coming up on the 25th. So that's always super exciting. But yeah, I had gone through a really rough experience. When people still ask me to this day, like, how was college? I'm like, it was terrible. And I'm just kind of like honest about it at that point. But I definitely wasn't always in that relationship. I had experienced a lot of emotional and verbal and some physical and sexual abuse. And I still kind of felt that I couldn't tell people, especially when it was happening, because I didn't want to ruin my partner's image. And I, didn't have any super active plans to leave. I, was still in this mindset that I kind of have to remind myself isn't my fault, but that I needed to stay with this person, that they needed me, that it was going to get better. And have definitely also been able to work through a lot of rather victim blaming tendencies, and rather similar to RC, I also don't really like the idea of calling myself a victim. And I love the idea of a warrior. I usually go with survivor, but that is super awesome and so empowering. And so that even you telling that story has greatly impacted me already. And I just remember the first person who I like really opened up to about it and told honestly how I felt was actually my sister. And I told her stories in more detail. And it was her reaction that really helped break down that barrier. And it was one without any judgment. And it was just empathy. And it was just her saying, like, this sucks. Like, just validating how terrible of a feeling it is to be trapped in that type of situation and to be treated in a way that deep down you know that you don't deserve, yet you're being made to feel that that's all you deserve. And so in telling that story, and in kind of the subsequent years since, I kind of feel that I grow stronger each time that I tell someone. And I'm very lucky to be at a point where I kind of joke with people, like, I could walk up to anybody on the street and tell them I was in an abusive relationship. And I also recognize that not everybody is in that situation. And I have found that me telling my story, whether it's in a conversation or, for example, on a podcast, 9 times out of 10, someone comes back and says, either I know someone who has experienced something like that, or I personally have. And it's been incredibly difficult and also empowering to talk to those people through their experiences. Or like, I've discovered that sometimes people don't know that they had experienced any type of abuse until they hear a story like mine and think, oh, I've been through that. And even throughout kind of my journey, I've looked back and kind of uncovered things, or, realized, like, oh, certain situations, like, that wasn't okay. And I didn't know it in the moment because of how I viewed, my partner and my situation. Part of me feels that I have lost the thread of one of the questions, but that is that is the main, kind of the biggest story that I tell. And it was so hard to talk about it when I was in it, that I think I've kind of shifted this mindset of, like, we're going to start the conversation. And that's been a very large driving force behind me. Absolutely.
For the sake of, because emotional abuse especially is something that is very subtle, it's not as mainstream, it's not as big of an event, and so sometimes we don't recognize it in the moment. Do you mind just sharing a few things that for all of us to know, right? Because sometimes we're doing it to others and we don't even realize that we're doing it, and that's something to heal as well. Mm-hmm. So if you can just share a few moments.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that question, because I've noticed, especially throughout the work or organizing I've done in the domestic violence community, that even that word itself, that phrase, domestic violence, is not actually personally what I refer to as my experience. I like to refer to it more so as relationship abuse, because the image that most people get when they hear domestic violence is, and this is just pure generalization, like a wife who has a black eye from her husband. And that definitely happens and is 100% an issue, but there is a lot more that leads up to that. And it shows up in a lot, all different types of relationships in all different ways. And so some of the more emotional abuse that I had experienced, for example, was a lot of gaslighting. And in that sense of saying, if I were to bring up a situation to my partner that he had hurt me, he would turn it around and say it was actually me doing the hurt. So it's like, it's getting that feeling of, I feel like, my perceived reality is false, and being told that what you feel is wrong, and nobody can tell you what you feel is wrong, because those are your own. And in terms of, like, specific situations, so as I had mentioned, I work in documentary film. And at the end of college, right after I had graduated, I was having a conversation with my partner, who also had a very strong interest in film. And I was discussing with him of, like, I might want to go get a master's degree. I might want to go to grad school. And he responded with something along the lines of, if you ever do get a master's degree, don't ever act like you know more about film than me. You will never, like, don't, essentially trying to knock me down of, like, I could never be more intelligent than him in that sense, and really kind of dashing something that we had in common. And I could see that the discussion of me advancing my career and something that also interests him made him feel really insecure. And that's why he latched out. And if like excessive forms of jealousy are also really big indicators of emotional abuse. A lot of my relationships with male friends were ruined as I identify as a straight woman. And so every man around me was a threat to my partner, who was also a man. And it's those instances aren't ones that I can really, call the police on or introduce into the law without physical evidence. It's more of like, oh, like you just have like an issue with your relationship. They're not recognized as criminal until it becomes physical. So I think that's an important distinction to make. So I appreciate that question. Great.
So in general, from both of you, before I want to get back into the storytelling and the artistic expression of all of this, that I think is a unique way of exploring things. But while we're just talking about trauma and when there is space to heal, if either of you, both of you, have a suggestion for people, what is the best indicator to know when emotionally something is there's some kind of abuse happening? I mean, you talked about some of the symptoms, right? But when we move into that empowering state, I guess it's how can we recognize that there might be something in us that needs to be healed? RC, do you want to start?
I feel like that's heavy because it takes so much forgiveness of yourself to get to that point. And I think that one way to recognize that there's some healing that's needed is when you're blaming yourself for something that doesn't seem like it's your fault, where you're questioning whether or not it's your fault, but you still blame yourself for it. And I think that's one space in which we have to take a step back and say, if I were talking to my very best friend, sister, cousin, brother, mom, dad, and this was happening and they were feeling this way, would I think that that was healthy or unhealthy? And would I suggest that they get help to heal from that? So I think that's one place to start. And it's, that's just a tough place to get to. It takes a lot. And I think sometimes you can't get there. You're not going to get there right away. And it's in your own time. And one of the things I tell people all the time is that nobody can tell you when to leave a situation, because you're going to go when you're ready, number one. But number two, also, nobody can tell you how to heal from your situation. And I feel like a lot of people say, well, you should do this right now. But maybe they're not ready to go talk to anybody. Maybe they need to sit with themselves first. Or maybe they're not ready to tell anybody. Maybe they're not ready to report this. And so I think that we need to respect each other's time and awareness of healing and their personal healing journey. I tell people all the time, we have different fingerprints for a reason.
Yes.
If your fingerprint is different than mine, no one else in the world has your fingerprint, which is an indicator that we're different in some way, which is a good thing. But you should respect that difference. Respect that I heal differently, I think differently, I process differently. And so, yeah, I think just recognizing when you're blaming yourself and it's just like, well, should I be?
Great. Thank you. Sydney, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I so resonate with the idea of, no one can tell you when or what you should do. That was such something that I had experienced when I was in that relationship, because when I did tell the story, or they had, actually seen instances of abuse that my friends, didn't necessarily know how to communicate to me, and I didn't know how to talk about with them, I would get a lot of like, you should just leave, you should just leave. And even after this experience, I've been able to tell people it was only ever going to be my choice to leave. It was only going to be when when I was ready. And I think, although it's really difficult, but the idea around like when do you know that it's time to tell a story? And it's really, really hard. But I would say if there's something, and I still experience this to this day, but if there's something that you're actively trying to not talk about because it makes you uncomfortable or if it makes you scared, that is, unfortunately, a very key indicator that you probably should talk about it. And rather similar to RC, I went to my college's mental health center and had gotten a therapist who, to this day, I credit with my being able to have survived that relationship. And I was able to tell him that story. And I think it is also important for survivors or those who have experienced difficult things to tell their story and to recognize when it should be told. But almost equally important is how we listen to them. So if somebody has chosen to disclose that information to you, your reaction is it's very important. And the most helpful experiences that I have had in telling a story is when somebody is accepting and understanding and empathetic. And those can be very difficult things to be on a regular basis, or hearing stories that are difficult. But it's when you get advice back, or you're told that you're doing something wrong or you're the issue. I think those can create more situations that alienate folks who have experienced things like abuse or assault, and makes them not want to tell that story. So it's equally important to be able to open your ears with also an open heart and open mind as well in terms of telling a story that way.
Wonderful. Thank you. When it comes to expressing things the artistic expression, so there's a moment, right? Therapy and artistic expression have a very interesting relationship, I find. We always said, like, all the actors back in the acting classes, it was always like, are you here to be an actor, or are you here for therapy? Because there's a moment when you got to go in. So for you, where do you find the balance between kind of coming into knowing when it's time to really work through issues with the professional and more of the therapy setting, and then or artistic expression? What does that allow you to do that maybe therapy doesn't get to tap into as much?
Who are you starting with?
Let's do it. We'll just keep going back and forth.
So what was the first part of your question? I'm sorry.
The first, it's just differentiating a little bit, because there's so much of an overlap between the therapeutic properties, what artistic expression allows us to do. But right, the moment that we kind of need to go into therapy, but how is our artistic expression different? What kind of healing does that allow you to do compared to working with a therapist?
Well, because I'm in performance art, one of the big things is if you are not at a place where you can retell the story without feeling like you're in that moment, then I don't think it's time for you to be performing this. Because it's different if you're tapping into that moment back in time and referring back to that moment. This is how I felt back then, and I'm showing you how I felt back then. Is very different than I feel this way right now. And so if you're not in that place, I think maybe you need to take a little more time.
That's so true.
And work through it, because you end up with the audience feeling like they need to care for you. They can't go on this experience with you because they're stuck in the trauma, because you're in it right in front of them right now. And you don't want the audience caring for you while you're trying to have them experience the breadth of this journey. They can't go on the rest of the ride with you. So that's one thing. And you'll know that when you're practicing and it's you're like not feeling safe in the moment. That's a good indicator. If in the moment you don't feel safe, and there's so many triggers, that now you're taking an extensive amount of time to process that trauma all over again. then, you can take another month, another year. It's okay. It takes
Great.
years to write plays and get them out, and that's okay. There's a reason.
I know. Great things don't happen overnight.
Right.
Sydney.
Yeah. I think it's important to have a really healthy balance of both, right? So to me, going into therapy, which if like something that's probably the main recommendation I give everyone, regardless of their experiences, is if you are fortunate to have the resources, treat it like a general physician, go as often as you can. There's no shame. And to me, it's a time for introspection. So I still have moments where there are things I don't want to bring up, and that means I know I should. It's a time to kind of explore more. And for me, in artistic expression, and ironically, I have also done one performance art piece about my experience. And to me, that's more of an expression of my experiences. So not as much of an examination of searching for certain answers or trying to dig further into something. It's more of, I have these feelings from this experience. It's almost like a weight you have to take off of your chest. Like you just have to tell this story. It's kind of akin to, if something really funny happens and you have to tell someone, like you have to call your best friend and just tell them that story. And it's that release of, it's no longer just weighing on you. And my therapist in college gave like probably one of the most beautiful metaphors to me about what it is to be a listener of stories like that. And he said that when students come into his office, they have a lot of wet blankets around them and they're cold and they're heavy. And in his office, they take off some of those blankets and he puts them on for them and like takes off some of that burden. And then if he needs to, he has colleagues or he has other friends that he can talk to, obviously with confidentiality of, sharing that burden as well. And so I see artistic expression, especially through music. That was really helpful for me, of listening to music that I felt expressed my feelings. So yeah, it's that difference of like, are we going to be exploring or expressing, and having that balance.
Great. Well, thank you both. Let's go ahead and do a reimagine here. Because today's world, it's not to say that the arts is forgotten, although I do feel like it is getting pulled further and further away from our everyday life, and often seen as entertainment, which does not hit the full depth of what artistic expression is able to do. So I would love to just reimagine with both of you what society would look like if we really did support and encourage artistic expression for everyone, not just those of us who are drawn to music and poetry early on in our lives. But if we really did that as a society, how do you think what kind of visuals or ideas come to you? Right, RC, do you want to start?
I think that we would be less insecure, because if everybody is able to express themselves, then we'd see, oh, this person goes through things like I do. So there's no reason for me to feel shame. This person is having a tough time with that. And so I think we'd feel less insecure about ourselves because we don't have to be better than anyone else, because everybody's going through it and we would understand and see that. And I also think that we would be more empowered, because we'd see not only the things that right now have us insecure, but we'd also see how people rise from all of those issues and concerns and traumas. So you get to hear everybody's stories of triumph and say, wow, if they could get there, I can get there too. So I think we'd be less insecure and more empowered for sure. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Sydney.
Yeah, I definitely, to echo RC, like empowerment, I think and feeling less alone. That was a really big thing for me too. I think the more people are able to tell their stories through art, especially, which allows you to find a medium of which you're most comfortable to tell the story, can be really empowering. And I think also careers would look different. To me, especially working in documentary film, there's very little money in a career. It's not always sustainable. And to me, that it feels like the monetary restrictions that we have prevents a lot of really beautiful stories from being told, or being told in the best way that they can. So although some art is really valued, if you see like large Hollywood films, those are really valued because they make a lot of money. But small documentary films that might be as impactful don't, and that monetary value isn't there. And so I think I would love to reimagine a society where if you wanted to be an artist as a career, or as a way to sustain yourself, it wouldn't be as much of a struggle, and it wouldn't be as hard of a decision to make of what direction to go in.
Great. Yes. And I'm just going to add into what you both have done, and that not only do we heal in the artistic expression of our own lives and shift into that empowerment, but going back, RC, to what you mentioned, and Sydney, I've echoed too, that it really it empowers other people to go on that healing journey. And I think we learn empathy much younger when we encourage artistic expression, because even those, as we know, the protagonist and the antagonist in the story world, and we say there's not much of a difference between the protagonist and the antagonist. Great antagonists are simply scared,
right, and
didn't heal. And when we express our stories, we get to see, we can start to see like, oh my God, I think we have to, just as much as those who are receiving it, there are those that are doing it. And I think that recognition can happen much earlier, so that all of our healing and can see how we're impacting each other so deeply all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Great. We're working on it. We're working on it.
We live big proponent of the protopia mindset of we are always progressing versus living in a dystopia or a utopia, which who knows if that exists, but always working.
It's a direction, not a place. A direction, not a place. But artistic expression is certainly a critical part of it, that I hope that all, the business world and can start to realize that without this creative space, without these spaces to encourage this, we lose our ability to empower each other, to practice empathy, that it is through this practice that we do these things.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, sorry. Did somebody want to add something to the end of? Okay.
You covered it.
Okay. As we go into, I like to look at the big picture, and then I like to give everyone, for the most part, I'll be those who are drawn into the arts, but really the inner artist within all of us. If you have a suggestion for a small step that people can take if they are interested in exploring their own story.
So I would say that one small step would be to start telling other people your story. Just start talking to other people, because a lot of times we hold them in. We try to get it right, and we try to say, okay, well, if I'm going to tell somebody this, I have to leave this out, or I have to clean up that, or something like that. I have to rearrange it because they're not going to understand. But I think one small step is to tell the story as it happened, and to find the courage to just stand on the story as it is without shifting it so that somebody else can be okay with it.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really great. And I know
it's tough.
Yes.
We have to work to get to that point. But
that's a great place. Just in everyday conversation, start to share little bits, a little bit more. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Sydney?
To speak to RC, that's something I definitely have started to do, and I think it's also okay when you make that decision to tell someone to be really particular about who you tell it to. It doesn't have to be, everyone. It doesn't have to be a stranger on the street. It can be, somebody who you can ensure the reaction is going to be comfortable and empathetic. And I think also consuming other stories is really helpful, is following in the path of watching other people who have been fortunate enough to become comfortable in telling their stories, watching some of RC's shows or some of her content and seeing how she expresses her story, or other, television shows that might depict some of your own experiences and see how those are told. And from that kind of consumption, you learn not only how to tell your own story, but also how to listen to them. And I think that those walk in hand really beautifully. So that would be my suggestion, is to actually consume other people's stories as well.
Great. Thank you both so much for making the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we start to see us moving in a better direction with the work that both of you are doing and so many other artists in this world, making sure that the arts is not forgotten. Right. And that we pound down and get people together and make sure that we're creating these spaces.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, thank you both. I'm going to pull. I'll see you in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and close out the show here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Again, this is Reimagine Together. If you are interested, next week's episode is actually going to be on Invest in Hope. And if you want to keep track of the shows every week, I encourage you to like the Facebook page and subscribe to the channel. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you